You can help support the channel by heading to our merchandise store and picking up some of our great aircraft designs created by our graphic designer. We'll have everything from fighters to transport aircraft, which you can choose to have printed on t-shirts, mugs, stickers and much more. Head to the description below and click the links and pick up your design today. Thank you and enjoy. So Herbie, can you talk us through Red Flag in 2002 and how that led into deploying to Iraq?
Yeah, very much. So February 2002 was the second Red Flag that I was lucky enough to experience. I did the first one in '92, again with the Tornado F3, which, looking back, I didn't really enjoy that much. The jet was still going through a lot of its development issues. The radar was still not particularly great. And I think tactically we weren't in the best place that we could have been at that time. 2002, we were in a very different position. The squadron I was on, fantastic bunch of individuals there. We were getting ready to go and do another Gulf deployment. The aircraft all had data link, different weapons, and tactically I think we were a lot more sharp than we had been in the preceding one. So we go out there, it's a long transit out. We actually did most of it, it seemed, unsupported with just tankers, but myself and my pilot I think got our jet there pretty much single-handedly with a stop from Bryce Norton to Bangor in Maine via Largesse, a night in the Azores. And we go there and do the normal stuff for the first couple of days, getting ready to go and fly the missions. Now, it was very memorable for a number of reasons. One, for the flying that I did. I was flying with a guy called Possum that I was going to fly in the Gulf with, very talented weapons instructor. So that was always going to be fun. The other thing with the other people there taking part in the exercise with us. The first mission I remember extremely well. The mission commander, his call sign was Spaniard. He was an F-16 CJ pilot, Vipers from Shaw, and their speciality was wild weasels, SEAD. So he drew the straw for the first mission command, and he did an amazing job of it. So already by mission 1, we're already sort of hitting mission 4 standard. Now the idea of Red Flag, of course, is to give you, in the most intense training possible, the first 7 missions that you might meet in real world operations. Most guys seem to get lost in the first 7. If you do the first 7 flying over the desert wastes of Nellis, Utah and Nevada, then you're going to have a good chance when it comes to real world operations. So that's really the reasoning behind it. But it does mean that the days are incredibly long, very intense, very high pressure. But for us, it was an extremely successful Red Flag. I think I flew 5 out of 6 missions I was planned to. There was one mission where I was mission commanding, which I was really disappointed because the jet broke on taxi and we had no time to go for the spare. I'm not even sure there was a spare available, so I was not in a good mood. But then Possum had this inspired idea to jump into a car, rush to the north side of Nellis, where we had our friends flying the Special Forces Herc, and said, "Oi, can we come flying with you?" So the captain said, "Yeah, jump on board," as they were about to taxi, flew a couple of cushions down into the front of a Herc, and then we flew again, doing something so totally different, low-level tactical intercepts in a Hercules, just sort of kneeling in the front of the cockpit. We had 4 A-10s flying close escort with us. Nice. And the main threat were a certain type of attack helicopter. So that was a memorable kind of day out, as well as very educational, seeing how those boys did things for real. So we did Red Flag and we come back and now we're getting ready for the Gulf. Now the F3, like any fighter fleet, there's going to be mini fleets out there. We had, I think, the Golden 40. They were the top end jets. We had all the modifications done that were taking part over the southern no-fly zone in Iraq. You then had other jets which were pretty much modified that would go around from squadron to squadron, allocated by group for that squadron to get ready to go and do their Gulf workup. Now, it seems crazy from the outside that why do you need a workup to go and do what you should be doing for training? But that's a factor of the mini fleets. So the jets that we had, the standard, everything had data link. Weapon fit, we had 4 of the Skyflash. We were still flying with those. You can see one behind me here. ASRAM, in place of the Sidewinder 9 Lima, which were a real game changer, and everybody had data link. And data link for the F3, again, huge game changer, made such a difference to the capability of that platform. But the big thing about it really was the fit of the jet. The jet came in either pig or piglet. So pig fit, the jet would have 2 of the 1,500 litre underwing tanks, but then they were configured with the outboard pylons, and this is where a lot of work had gone in by a lot of very clever people in the design office for the F3 and operational requirements units and the squadron down at Coningsby. So on one of the outboard pylons we had towed ray decoy. Very, very, very clever bit of equipment. Effectively, it was a little transmitter. It would create a false aiming point on a fiber optic cable 100 meters behind the aeroplane. So that missile that was going to come for you would be seduced now by what we call the TURD, the towed radar decoy, 100 meters behind us. Not very far away, but far enough, you know, for that missile not to get you. We had a 5-at chaff pod because one of the missile systems we would face out there needed chaff of a certain wavelength. That's how chaff works. So that pod had that chaff cut to that wavelength to counter that threat. So we had to train, and I think it was a 6 or a 7 sortie syllabus that every crew had to do before redeploying to the Gulf. We just basically a handling trip for the pilot because it did handle different, hence pig fit. Piglet fit is when we flew it without the fuel tanks. So we'd learned to do piglet fit combat. So again, the pilots would fly air-to-air combat with the outboard pylons, and some of the lucky ones would actually get to fly combat with the TURD deployed as well to see how it would handle. We go to Spade Adam, we do a lot of work doing anti-surface to air missile defences out in the Spade Adam electronic warfare training range, which was very, very, very physical flying, especially against the SAM-8, because we'd go in at 250 feet, we'd be targeted, be an immediate max G pull up, I think, to 1,500 feet. We then roll through about 120 degrees, pull the nose down, and then recover, as well as turning on to 90 degrees to try and defeat the missile. At the same time, you'd be simulating putting out chaff and any other things you could do to try and defeat the missile. So we trained doing that. We'd go into the simulator. One of the biggest threats that we would face would be the high, fast flyer, especially the MiG-25 Foxbat. Now, we couldn't train against that because there was nothing like it around the UK, or we didn't have the airspace. So we go into the simulator and train against that threat, because I think it kept some of the seniors awake at night. A Foxbat, airborne out of Iraq, it could be around Saudi airspace and actually targeting some of the high value assets like in AWACS or tankers within minutes.
Wow.
But they're difficult to shoot down. They'd be very, very high, very, very fast, and all missiles have parameters. You know, max range, min range. If you fire a missile when it's crossing you at too high a speed, well, it's a bit like trying to, you're on a high-speed train and you're trying to read the name of the station you're going through. It's too quick, you can't cope with it. Well, in crude figures, a missile is a bit like that, and it has to pull an awful lot of lead, i.e. point ahead of the point it's trying to intercept to do so. But against a target that is going so fast, it's pointing so far ahead, it actually puts that target outside of its seeker. So then it goes blind and the missile fails.
Yeah.
So we had a very specific approach to actually intercept a Foxbat. So we could go into the sim and practice that time and time again. So if we actually met that threat, we'd be confident of actually handling it in the air. And one of the big things that would help us with that would be the data link, of course, which the F3 had. So if we saw one flying, we could just maneuver as appropriate, being ready for it, just in case we thought it was going to come for one of the high value assets. So in April, we go out to Saudi, we go out to Prince Sultan Air Base. I think it was my second of 3 deployments. And we arrive, and this really is the coincidence. It's almost like the most amazing planning that you could ever believe. But the first day we go into one of the big mission briefs, or the brainstorms before the brief. We walk into a room full of familiar faces, because in that room are the CJs that we've been in Red Flag 2 months before with from shore. In that room were the F-15Cs from Elmendorf that we've been with in Red Flag 2 months before. In that room were the EA-6B Prowler guys, Mixed Navy Marine Corps unit, who we've been with in Red Flag just 2 months before. Wow. And then the AWACS tactical director walked in, and he'd been in Red Flag 2 months before, and now they've got the Brits. So it's almost perfect, because we've gone through 2 weeks of really high-end, intense training, and now we're doing ops with exactly the same people we've done this training with. It was perfect. It was just
incredible. Did you all recognize each other?
Yeah,
oh,
right from great. Yeah, because generally the mission commanders tend to be the same people as well, but we'd had a few parties together out in Vegas and things like that. So yeah, very much. So you know, they'd heard about the F3, they knew how to use us, they knew our strengths, they knew our weaknesses and everything else. So it just meant that the next 5 weeks were a pure pleasure working with these guys in operational theatre.
Yeah,
yeah.
Absolutely. So how long were you out there for?
The standard we'd do would be 5 weeks. The squadron would have a 10-week responsibility. We'd break it into 5-week halves. And it's not like a football team where you might have your A team and then a B team made up of your reserves, your substitutes. We had to balance each half of the detachment perfectly. So you'd always look to have a weapons instructor in each half, the same amount of mission commanders in each half, somebody who had a really great knowledge, a qualified flying instructor of the aircraft systems, impacts of temperature. Would you believe taxiing? It's a very long taxi at Prince Sultan Air Base.
Yeah, yeah.
And if you had to taxi, there might be periods you'd have to stop for a while, just to let the tyres and brakes cool down a bit.
Really?
The graphs were so complex.
Wow.
So you always need like a graph guru who could go into those. And then you need like a fair split of the junior guys. For some people, it would be their first operational deployment. So you'd need to crew them appropriately with an experienced person. Sensitively, you know, sometimes people don't get on with others. Yeah. But it meant you couldn't have a strong half and a weak half. Both halves had to be the same one. And this one I remember well, because I used to look after Saudi for the squadron, is the boss became a father again. So it's like, when are you coming out to take over the debt? And he said, no, you're not, I'm not. So he let me run it for the 5 weeks, which was great, you know, great privilege because I had 70 people. And the thing about ops is I think you see the best of people, highly motivated people. The engineers, absolutely fantastic. Logistics, operations, admin, intelligence, all those components that actually make up an operational deployment. So yeah, it was busy. I flew about 60 hours, I think, in that period, which was quite a lot because I was flying with Possum, and Possum was one of these guys who could always make the jet work. So we would always crew in 4 to put 2 into the operational mission over Iraq. So we crew in 4, 3 would then get airborne, so we're covering for redundancy now, systems failures, and we take 3 to the tanker. And it was about a 50-minute transit to the tankers, which were just south of Kuwait. We'd all fill to full. In the transit, we'd do lots of system checks. Everything had to be 100%. So, for example, if you did a power check on your towed ray decoy, there was a number. I think it went up to 30. I think number 24 meant it was generating sufficient power to be a viable target for a missile. So you'd hit a button, it would do a built-in test, and you watch the numbers count up and count up. And it stops at 17. That meant that your turd was not serviceable enough to take into the operational theatre. So then dash 3, how's yours? Oh, I've got 25. It's like, okay, 2's out, 3's in.
Yeah.
So that's how we'd manage the jets within the mission. And sometimes a jet would have a technical failure actually over Iraq. So we'd come out as a pair and then do a swap over and take the 3rd jet that was still on the tanker back into the theatre. And that way we could always manage our commitment of having the jets, you know, out there. And we'd just be flying over Iraq, over the southern no-fly zone. Now, the air threat we knew about, and we were super confident about any air threat that would be there. We had loads of Eagles with us. We had F-16 CJs. Now, their job really was suppression of enemy air defense, but they had a full air-to-air loadout as well, and you had us. And with our data link, we would just be roaming over the deserts of southern Iraq. So we'd keep an eye on where the high-value players were, and then we'd just be going east or west, just be positioning ourselves to where we thought, you know, a threat might come from, to always be at the right place. The other thing we were acutely aware was the surface-to-air missile threat.
Oh, yes.
That was very real. We're not talking, you know, double-digit latest generation surface-to-air missiles, but we're talking about SAMs that could still bring aircraft down if you weren't alert or awake. So we'd always have one eye on the radar homing warning receiver. If we felt we're getting targeted, we just, you know, turn a few degrees, maybe pop out a bit of chaff, just change where we were going to be so we couldn't be predictable. But the other thing as well, we had aircraft that were listening in behind us and they could tell us exactly what was going on with the missile sets.
Right.
So, you know, there are places welded in my brain like Basra, Samawa, Nasiriyah, Samara, all these cities that had the SAM sites, and they would just be updating us all the time of the status of the SAM sites that were looking at us.
Wow.
And occasionally we'd have to relocate. So there was one mission, we were in the center part of Iraq, but we had to go to the east. And we couldn't just go fly straight there, straight line, because there were all the SAM sites in the way. So we sort of had to thread the needle in between the missile engagement zones just to safely transition from one side to the other. Because to be brutally honest, one of the limb facts about the F3 was it still wasn't a high flyer. So in pig fit, We were struggling really above low 20,000 feet.
Yeah.
So we were above all the small arms, but we're in the heart of the envelope for a lot of the surface-to-air missile systems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then nights, we go and do the night missions, which they could be really memorable. I remember one, and with the goggles on, I was just aware of just flashing light out to the east. And I looked up, nothing, goggles back down. And it was just this line of thunderstorms, really intense thunderstorms over the Euphrates Valley. And for a moment, it just captivated me. And I thought, no, come on, got to concentrate on what you're doing here.
Head in the game.
It sounds really weird, actually. Saudi, it was 100% dry, no alcohol.
Yeah.
That's good. Personal opinion, real personal opinion. Alcohol and ops.
Keep you focused. Yep.
Very much, very much. So, you know, there were no disciplinary issues or anything like that to worry about. The Americans as well were pretty dry. We had French at PSAB at the time. We didn't really work or talk too much for the French, just OPSEC reasons. But sometimes the Americans say, we know you Brits have got some booze somewhere. And we're going, we have no booze. Have you tried the French? You know, they'd leave disappointed and see if they had a sort of wine, something going on over there. But no, that kept everybody incredibly focused. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Everybody just did fit camp or whatever instead.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But that was just me, and people go, oh, how boring. But when you're running the detachment, as I was for that one period, it just meant that something was removed that could always cause problems.
Absolutely. Well, John, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much indeed.